From incredible adventures to priceless treasure,
It's mine.
thrilling chases,
What a ride!
daring escapes,
Run!
and amazing feats. There's nothing you can't do.
Is it possible to make friends with zombies?
Well, almost nothing.
Not a riddle or a knock-knock joke.
When you're watching Disney's DuckTales.
The small screen, the telly, the boob tube, in a word, television. Stories once thought doomed to fail on the big screens of Hollywood saw new life because of its conception. And in the late 80s, newly appointed CEO of the Walt Disney Company, one Michael Eisner, would expand Disney's reach into the medium through a road once thought economically impossible: television animation. Years later, one man, a man doing a discount Rod Serling, a man with admittedly way too much time on his hands, has embarked on a quest to watch and review them all. So join us now, shall you, as you are now entering a new dimension. A dimension whose boundaries are that only of your own imagination. A dimension we like to call the Disney TVA file. Well, greetings and salutations, one and all, to the second episode of the Disney TVA Files, the podcast where we take a deep dive into episodes of Disney television animation productions to ultimately determine whether or not they deserve to be revered or reviled. Now, before we jump into the podcast proper, I want to take some time to briefly discuss and address the elephant in the room, the pink elephant, if you will. That being that it's been quite some time since our last journey into the files. Now, our pilot episode of Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears was in last June, and as I'm currently recording this, we're in January of the following year. Now, I don't really have much of an explanation for why that is, other than this show was originally bi-monthly, and if I was maintaining that schedule, the second episode would have come out in September, which is usually when I do something called the VEDS project. That usually occupies most, if not all, of my attention and time. Now, you could ask why I didn't just do a podcast episode in September and do another dual release. And again, I don't really have much of an explanation, other than I probably just didn't even think or consider it. But either way, we are back on schedule after our long hiatus of sorts, and I'm happy to be back and happy to be talking about yet another show in the Disney TVA library, that being the late 80s classic, DuckTales. Now, DuckTales premiered in the late 1980s, 1987 to be exact, and ran for about 100 episodes, split across 4 seasons. Today we are going to be looking at an episode from the 4th season, ultimately ending in late November of 1990. The basis for the show and the real concept of it kind of originates in the old popular Uncle Scrooge comics created by the legendary Carl Barks, and it was adapted and sort of taken into this new form in DuckTales to be about Scrooge McDuck and his nephews Huey, Dewey, and Louie after being left in Scrooge's care by Donald, who I believe went off to the Navy.
In the Navy, yes, we can sail the 7 seas in the Navy.
Embarking on various adventures, searching for treasure, fighting evil, solving mysteries, and rewriting history. Speaking of that history, let's discuss that for a moment, shall we? Now, like with Adventures of the Gummy Bears, which we covered last time, DuckTales was made in a very similar vein, trying to improve the overall quality of animation that was seen on television at that time, which was often criticized for being low budget and cheap. Now, I could be wrong, but I do believe how they achieved this was doing more drawings per second in the animation itself, so it wasn't quite Hanna-Barbera. And whether you liked it or not, it did prove successful at the time, being popular with most audiences and critics, causing Disney to look at it and put more shows in its vein into production. So not long after DuckTales, we were getting things like Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers and Tailspin. In fact, one of the characters in the show, Launchpad McQuack, was later spun off into another show in the Ducks universe, Darkwing Duck. But those are another show. DuckTales would also spawn several other things, most notably a popular Capcom game released in 1989, which would later be remade in 2013, adding, among other things, voice acting for the characters in it. And then, sort of moving forward to around the present day, the whole series got remade back in 2017, and in my opinion, was really damn good. Now with our sort of history lesson out of the way, what are my memories of DuckTales? Well, obviously I wasn't around for when the show was originally airing new episodes. I was born in '96. But I do have some very faded memories of possibly watching an episode or two on the old Toon Disney television block. Because I do remember on that channel watching things like Aladdin and Timon and Pumbaa, and possibly Tailspin and DuckTales. But again, those are long since faded in my memory. I have also played both the original DuckTales video game when they released it in that sort of Disney Afternoon collection on PlayStation a few years back, as well as playing the remaster on PS3. But apart from those things, I don't have that much of a connection to this version of the show. Mostly the 2017 version. Again, I watched that a lot, and I think that show is great. So I am very excited to sort of take a journey back to where it all began in, a sort of weird sense. And that's exactly what we're gonna do. So you all sit tight, and I will be right back with my thoughts on Disney's DuckTales Season 4, Episode 2, Attack of the Metal Mites, right here on the Disney TVA Files. Alright everyone, so I just got done watching DuckTales Season 4, Episode 2, Attack of the Metal Mites. What did I think of it? I'll have to say I'm very mixed. It's honestly a lot better than I actually thought it was going to be going into this, but it didn't really live up to, I guess you could say, the hype. You think of DuckTales, you think that, you think of the video game, or video games, really. You think of the fact that it got rebooted, the fact that so much about this property, the theme song alone, kind of builds up and you really get ramped up. And maybe I just kind of got one of the more simpler episodes, because the basic plot of this episode is that Glomgold's scientists have invented a bug called a metal mite that he hires this very racist character called Dijon, who, from the brief research I've done before I, started recording my reaction here, apparently first appeared in the movie, the sort of Aladdin-esque DuckTales movie about a magic lamp and a genie. I don't know why. People say that, Aladdin had racist stereotypes. Nah, Dijon kind of gives all of Agrabah a run for its money. I don't think it would bother me as much. I would kind of wince at it, but, they keep having him pop up, and every time he'd pop up, I'm like, why are you here? But, getting back to the plot, Dijon is tasked with taking a glass jar of the metal mites to, first, the bean factory that is owned by Scrooge McDuck, which they destroy, and then soon sets them upon, the main target, which is Scrooge McDuck's money bin. So I guess in the grand scheme of things, this wasn't really an episode about solving a mystery or rewriting history. It's also kind of an outlier in the series overall, because again, you think of DuckTales, you think of adventures with Scrooge and Huey, Dewey, and Louie. Huey, Dewey, and Louie aren't really in this episode. They're kind of shoehorned in at the last minute. We see them in the beginning with their lemonade stand cracker swindle, which, they make $250 from, so I would wonder if anybody tried to do that in real life. But pretty much after that point, they're kind of gone. This is much more of a Fenton episode, who of course is Gizmo Duck, then I would even say it's like a Scrooge episode. But I really like what they did with the character here. I liked kind of how he felt like he almost had to resign because he no longer had the Gizmo Duck suit. And Scrooge is just kind of like shooing him away without kind of like, he's not even putting him down, sort of softly. He's kind of just like, no, just do what I'm telling you to do. You're not fired. I'm not letting you quit.
Seeing as how you hired me to protect your money bin, and seeing as how I'm a spineless wimp and can't perform my duties, I'm going to have to...
I haven't got time now. I've got to try to save my money.
Resign!
It was kind of hard. I'm almost kind of glad, in a way, that Huey, Dewey, and Louie weren't in this episode as much, including Webby. That they weren't really in this episode as much, because after watching the DuckTales reboot, it is kind of hard to go back to Huey, Dewey, and Louie all sounding alike and having zero defining personalities between them to separate them. Moving on, one of the things that I was kind of surprised by, granted I don't really know why, is how funny the show could actually be, sometimes unintentional, other times actually intentional, and I'll give you a couple examples. At the start of the episode, there's a kind of funny scene with Fenton and Scrooge, with Fenton having to count how much money Scrooge has, gold coins he has in the money bin, which I would assume is one of the only times we ever actually know what Scrooge's net worth is. Again, maybe it's in an earlier episode, I don't know, I'm only watching this one for this episode, so, leave in the comments if this is not the first time we've figured this out, but apparently Scrooge's net worth, at least what he has in his money bin in this episode, which it could fluctuate, is $143,619,950.01. And I think what really makes me laugh about that is the fact that it wasn't even like it was 99 cents, so the missing cent would make it a flat amount. It's the 1 cent that kind of kills me a little bit. Another genuinely funny moment, I think, in the show is because Gizmo Duck and Fenton are a big part of this episode. There's, of course, and the Bean Factory, like I mentioned before, the Metal Mites were destroying it. In the episode, Gizmo Duck shows up to help get the workers out before the building crumbles. There's actually a legitimately funny exchange because Fenton, as Gizmo Duck, is sort of projecting himself almost to be this Adam West Batman kind of purveyor of truth and justice. And I love how in this one scene, I will play it for you now, the worker is just not having it.
Up right there, you mangy metal-munching mite, before I make minced meat out of your measly, meandering metal.
Will you shut up and save me already?
And how it kind of becomes a running gag, because they do it a second time.
And you thought my head was only filled with brains.
No, I'd never take that.
I kind of just love how Gizmo Duck, for a lot of this episode, is kind of just a punching bag. It made me laugh every time they made a joke at his expense. However, like I said before, there are also some things that unintentionally made me laugh. For example, I did not know that there were guns in Duckburg. I wasn't expecting them to have guns. I mean, granted, they are police, so I guess they would have guns. But I wasn't really expecting it to show up in DuckTales, that the duck cops in Duckburg would have firearms. Again, I don't know why I wasn't expecting it. Before we wrap up this episode of the Disney TVA Files with my sort of final thoughts and overall rating, I do want to ask a question, which is, I don't know how Fenton saved the day in this episode. Maybe I'm missing a piece of lore. Actually, no, I probably am missing a piece of lore. But I never understood how he was able to save the day, because the way they get the Metal Mites out of Scrooge's money bin, Fenton walks off screen and says the call to action for the Gizmo Duck suit, which was already destroyed, to sort of Iron Man its way onto him. Why would that work for the bugs? And I'm only asking because the episode itself doesn't really explain how that works. It's one of the rare times, I guess, maybe on this show, or it's one of the rare times, I think, in a show period for me, that they kind of don't explain something and they just sort of assume that you have been following the show and would know why that works. So, overall, like I said at the start, I did like what I saw. It didn't reach the heights that I necessarily had for it, but I'm not going to hold that on the show itself. The animation itself is very lively and colorful, but the writing at times, I'm not gonna lie, it was a bit much to get through. And, at least in my experience, our last episode, which was of Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears, I almost feel like Gummy Bears was a little bit better. But for now, it's time to give our final rating of whether or not DuckTales Attack of the Metal Mites deserves to go into the Disney Vault or stay on Disney+. And even though I have some qualms with it, I did enjoy my time with it, so it's kind of almost barely skating by, maybe not barely, but it's not as high as Gummy Bears, but it is still staying on Disney+. Well, there you have it, everyone. That was my thoughts on the DuckTales episode Attack of the Metal Mites. Stay tuned to our next episode, where we'll be looking at the new adventures of Winnie the Pooh. But before we move any further, we also have to decide what episode we are going to be looking at from that series. And for that, we will once again look to our random number generator. So, random number generator, what season of the New Adventures of the Winnie the Pooh will we be looking at? Season 2. So, now random number generator, what episode in Season 2 are we going to be looking at? Episode 8, which, according to Disney+, is Stripes/Monkey See, Monkey Do Better. So stay tuned to that, friends. But for now, I shall leave you. Until the next time we journey into the Disney TVA file.